Welcome to the fifth episode of the Better with Brock podcast. I have my, actually old client, but physiotherapist, Butch Redoblado in the building. How you doing this morning, man?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, Brock. First ever podcast recording, so a little bit sort of, I guess, nervous, but no, quite keen, more than anything, man, to get into it. So thanks for the invite, bro. Looking forward to it.
Mate, what an honor to have you on my podcast for the first podcast. Hopefully this is one of many to come. Um, so, so we were just talking off air before, just before this. Butch actually spent a bit of time in Christchurch. I actually played touch with his brother, versed him in rugby. So we might have a little bit in common that way, hooked into Christchurch. But what did you go into Christchurch for? Because sorry, to give you guys a bit of background, Butch is now in Brisbane. And I've done the same thing too, jumped over the Tasman to Sydney. Originally first went to Gold Coast, but what made you make the jump? Because so many people from New Zealand end up coming to Australia.
Yeah, well, it was actually my mum first, bro. So after the 2011 earthquakes, which were you there still during? Yep.
Yeah, I was at high school.
Yeah. So the 2011 earthquakes sort of started that cascade of moving over to Aussie. So mum didn't quite like the feeling of an aftershock. So she thought, I'm just going to go and find, another area to sort of reside in. And yeah, she got a job offer in Brizzy. Just a bit of background, mum and dad are both GPs. So mum was able to get a job there, and then yeah, just slowly one of us, one by one, we all moved over, and culminating in myself. Actually, I was the last one to jump the ship and go over to Aussie, and that was in 2016. So yeah, but I do miss Christchurch, as I'm sure part of you does in a way. But yeah. No, good to be here.
Yeah, I think Christchurch is an amazing place to grow up. I think after the earthquakes, it was definitely different. Like it was such a different vibe. It was like a ghost town. And even
definitely,
I took my fiance back this year. Like we found a couple of weeks in lockdowns where there was no quarantine or anything. And we went over for my brother's birthday, and it was still very similar. Like years later, like I left probably maybe a bit later after you, after 2016, but there's still like the CBD is very empty. It's very low to the ground because a lot of buildings fell over and they're doing construction, but it's still taking quite a while. So I'm actually quite glad that I made the jump. Like obviously I miss the people, and that's probably the biggest thing that I miss about Christchurch is the people. I definitely don't miss the weather, that's for sure.
Yeah. No, look, I think opportunity wise, it's obviously done you good, and same with myself, man. I do wish I moved sooner, but yeah, like you, I went back in June as well for a break. I don't know, just got that that awesome vibe of being, I guess, home again. So but yeah, no, good memories anyway.
Yeah. So do you think having your parents as a GP, as GPs, influenced your decision to get into physiotherapy and kind of helping people in some way?
Absolutely, man. And they weren't, I guess, aggressively like, oh no, I want you to be a doctor. But growing up, I was inspired by mum and dad. And like I remember, I've got vivid memories of dad coming home from work and he's got his stethoscope around his neck, and you just knew that here's a man that went in there and just helped people. So yeah, I sort of thought I want to do something like that, but they were never like, oh, I want you to be a doctor, but yes, I did draw inspiration from them 100%.
Yeah, and I think that type of parenting style, if it is a style, doesn't really work if you kind of push things on. Like one thing I'm super grateful for is my dad supporting all my decisions.
Yeah.
First of all, I wanted to do music because my dad ended up teaching me guitar. So I was like, yeah, I want to do music. And then I was playing, and then I was told Dad I wanted to study at jazz school. I studied at CPIT jazz school.
Yeah, nice.
And he was like, my biggest fan, helping me out as a kid, learning how to play together, sing together. And then when I was like, yeah, I don't really want to do music, I think I want to do personal training, my dad was like, that's awesome. You know, he wasn't like,
Yeah,
oh,
nice.
no, you should do music. That's, you know, that's where you should go, just because he wanted to do it. And I think
Correct.
that, yeah, I think that support really actually helps you kind of believe in yourself, or
Absolutely.
helps you guide yourself to your own decision. Um,
Mm.
so, so what does your day look like as a physiotherapist? Like, what are you dealing with day to day? Like we kind of touched on off air, you're kind of, at the practice, but also not. Like, what does your day look like?
Yeah. So look, I'm a one-man show. I own the Lakes Physio. I'm in a medical center, and so my rooms being in the medical center, I am predominantly in the clinic doing treatment. I'm a very hands-on type of physio because I do believe in the fundamentals of physiotherapy being a very hands-on profession. So I'm always in the clinic, and if I'm not, I'm doing admin either in the clinic again or like at a cafe or something like that. But my day is split between treating clients in the clinic, and every now and then I will go out to do gym rehabs with patients. Because I'm a massive advocate for rehabilitation in the gym setting. I think it's the best way to sort of regain function that's been lost through injury or trying to be built up, you know, post-surgical, for example. So
Mm.
I'll be there for like, you know, a good maybe 30% of my week. And that's probably the generic split, 70 to 30, 70% in the clinic, 30% gym rehab. And also, you know, every now and then I'll do the occasional home visit to a client's house if they can't, for whatever reason, in the clinic.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's so important what you said around people actually say dealing with an injury or dealing with discomfort and actually training through it. So many
Mm,
people will get injured or say hurt their lower back, hurt their knee, hurt their shoulder, hurt their elbow, you know, whatever they're experiencing, and just go, I'm going to take 2 weeks off to make it get
mm,
better, which I guess, you know, having rest can help, but also like you need to strengthen areas around the injury,
mm,
because you can train around things. You know, you don't have to train through it, which is, I
mm.
think, you know, a very kind of different way to think. If you can train, because if something hurts, just don't keep doing it. But there is some sort of element of pain as well that you kind
Correct.
of need to strengthen things up. But what are the most common injuries that you are dealing with?
So in the gym-based setting, this is quite a like I guess a broad question, but I want to
Yeah.
categorize it into two main types of injuries there, Brock. So you've got your acute injuries and your overuse. Your acute injuries are obviously that sort of one instance or one episode of an overload, and then you feel an injury, and usually a patient comes in here and they'll tell me, oh, I remember I was exactly doing a whatever, you know, a deadlift or a squat, and I felt my back go, that kind of thing. And then you've got your overuse injuries, which is they're the ones that, you know, I probably see more commonly in the gym-based setting. They're like an addition of micro strain or micro tearing, where the body doesn't quite heal enough, and then you just do it again, and it's just repetition of that micro strain over a period of time. And then we get into this, and then all of a sudden you pass this threshold in the y-axis of when it is too much and when does the body start to produce pain. And over time, you pass that threshold, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'm a little bit sore. So you got your
Mm.
acute and overuse. For the acute, the biggest one definitely is low back pain, and it is pertaining to uh, you know, the heavier we go, you know, we have to, and you know this as well, man. Like we have to keep our spine, you know, relatively neutral, you know, especially if we're doing things like, you know, your deads and your squats. So if that doesn't, you know, quite happen correctly, then we get into that situation of low back pain. And that's usually from things like a bulging disc or a herniated disc in really severe cases where it pinches on the nerve and you get things like sciatica. But also, when that kind of happens, it could also be ligaments being, you know, torn from that really heavy load in that position, sort of thing.
Mm.
But yeah, so bulging disc is definitely a really common one that I treat, from an acute overload perspective.
So, so with those acute situations, especially with lower back, and I can speak from experience, I've been in a place where I've needed a physio's
mm,
help. Like,
mm,
what's your first steps? And I know it may differ between what's sitting in front of you, but like with lower back pain,
mm,
like, yeah, what's your first steps of actually getting better and starting to improve? Because it's so discouraging, because your lower back is such a center for everything that you do. You bend down to pick something up, it hurts. You try to stand
mm,
up from sitting down, it hurts. You go to the bathroom, it hurts.
mm.
Like you
Yeah.
you open the fridge to reach down for some milk and it hurts. How do you
Yes.
how do you get people on the path to recovery?
Yeah, like you said, it does sort of vary depending on what I see in the clinic and the mechanism of injury, because you've got to obviously formally diagnose. But from I'll talk from what's most common, which is a bulging disc situation. I actually don't advocate for long periods of rest. Um,
Yeah.
so I would say try and keep moving to some degree, even if it means you just go for like a 15-minute walk, because I think the blood flow that you achieve doing that helps with promoting healing. If we just stay stagnant, you're not really doing that as efficiently. I understand sometimes it's very severe. And if even a walk is too much for patients, I'll be like, well, if you're in a supine or lying down position, why not pump your ankles up and down, or even just slightly bend your knees up and down, or swing your arms, just produce some sort of movement to get a bit of blood flow. And then then I try to teach ways that they can go about and doing their daily functions safely for their back. And so, say if they did, for example, like do their knee in the gym, then going down to pick something up can be really sore. So I'll say, well, why not instead of squat where you really bend the knee into flexion, how about hip hinge and do like more of a deadlift to go and do that, which is a similar sort of movement. It's just one's utilizing the knee, the other one's utilizing the hip. So trying to or if, for example, going down into that deep flexion really aggravates like a herniated disc. If they go down more in a split squat, position, because usually with a herniated disc, man, you get it more on one side. So for the side, say if it's my right side, then I'll go, okay, we'll go down into a split squat position or a lunge position to pick something up, and have your right side as your back leg, so it's straighter and not going into that flexion. Things like that. So just giving them tips on how to go about their daily life without having to, because I think if you then get into that kind of pain avoidance behavior, that actually becomes negative. And then, there's a lot of like avoidance of, social situations like catching up with friends and all that, or family, just because they're worried their back's going to go again. And I want to just, my philosophy as a physio, I want to just nail that. Like, no, you can still do that. Here's how I want you to achieve it. So and so.
Yeah. And I think that's very important what you're saying. Like, you have to, as I kind of touched on before, you have to really manage that pain and not avoid it, because you if you avoid something, then you're less confident, and then that can pour into other areas of your life. How do you manage
100%.
that? How do you manage that threshold and ultimately tell someone it needs to hurt for you to get better? Because no one wants to hear that, because they've just hurt their back or thrown it out. They're like, well, I just want to get better. So how do you manage that threshold? Because I that must be quite difficult to say to someone, hey, this is going to hurt,
man.
but it's good for you. Don't
worry.
worry.
That's it. Good. Yeah. And actually, it's really funny because a lot of my patients will give me a lot of crap for that, because I always say, look, the old no pain, no gain, just go and do it, which I actually hate as a saying, but
I do too.
there is, but there is a bit of truth in that. You sort of just have to figure out when is it becoming excessive and unhealthy for the client or the patient. If they're avoiding things that they should be doing, then then that's not good. You know, if they've had to take time off work, you know, oh no, because, you know, sitting down really aggravates my back. Well, how about have a chat to HR and get a stand-up desk, you know? Just trying to like, and it is trial and error, you know, that you have to sort of, I'll give them my advice, you know, like that we'll do that picking up situation again, you know, get into a split squat rather than, you know, reaching forward, you know, and if they tell me second time, oh no, that doesn't quite work, then, you know, I'll alter it. I'll tell them, okay, well, instead, you know, do this and that. But it is, yeah, managing that threshold, as you've asked, is trial and error, and it just depends on. I'll give my generic advice of keep moving, and based on what they're presented with, I'll be like, okay, well, this is how I want you to do things. This is how I want you to pick something up, and if that doesn't work, I'll make them do a couple of movements in the clinic to try and, you know, see, okay, well, this is how we'll do it instead. Yeah.
Like I think it's very important, you know, like you're touching on, to give people solutions. Like what you know, which is what you're doing, because, you know, like, so when I threw out my back, I was squatting and it was like 9 p.m. I was underslept. I'd just done a huge, so I was face-to-face personal training at the time. I'd done a huge day, like somewhere around 14 clients. It was just massive. I started at 6 a.m. and I hadn't finished my program. I was so frustrated. Like I just had like 3 sets of squats to do. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do them. I was tired and I probably just should have went home, but I was like, all right, I'll get under the barbell. And I loaded up and I was squatting 120, which was still a pretty decent amount of weight, like a pretty good weight, but like it wasn't really near my top. But when I went down, something went on one side, like you touched on, and I couldn't stand up. So I couldn't actually straighten my spine. Like I was so sore. So I actually just lay down on the ground for like 5 minutes, and no one was in the gym. It was actually quite dangerous. Like there was no one around. I was just like, oh man, this does not feel good. So I actually had to walk hunched over, and I had to like keep my spine flexed. I called an Uber, and I was like, I'm sorry, man, I'm just going to have to lie down in the back. Like, just forgive me. Like I'll take the fine if I'm not wearing a seatbelt. And I just lay there, and I got home, and then I just, when I got out, I still had to stay flexed, and I kind of like crawled up the stairs. Like it was really bad. And I got into bed. I went to sleep. I woke up and I couldn't stand up. So I called my clients the next day, and I actually didn't know what to do. I really was like struggling for things to do. And I actually had to get an ambulance come over the next morning and kind of do some stuff. And then this kind of annoyed me. They're like, oh, you'll be fine. And I was like, mate, I can't stand up. Like, I'm not just going to be fine. They're like, oh, just lay on your back and, you know, put your legs side to side. And that really frustrated me because I didn't feel better. And luckily I had a client that was helping, like they didn't give me anything for the pain. And it was like excruciating. I actually tried to stand up at home and I blacked out because of the pain. And that's the first time I'd ever blacked out. And I was living on my own at the time. So this was like pretty scary stuff. I was like, whoa, okay, you know, like I really need to sort this out. But because I was a personal trainer, I did have a physio nearby and they really, really saved me. Apparently it was like a muscle spasm. And I know a lot of physios have, you know, a lot of different opinions around, you know, around the experience, but I did some dry needling. And then I also just had to change the way that I was training because I did it in squats. And one thing I'd like to get to is, as you touched on, things like split squats and doing things differently. Like everyone thinks to get a good set of legs, you have to do squats or you have to do deadlifts, but it's just not the case. Like if you can't back squat or for some reason your body cannot perform a squat with good technique at the moment, there's a ton of options. You can do a split squat, you can do a Bulgarian split squat, you can do step ups, you can do a lunge, like you can do front foot elevated split squats, rear foot elevated. Like there's so many options. So what do you what kind of exercises do you give people if they can't, and I know you're not like a personal trainer where you're, you know, writing out workout programs, but what sort of things are you giving people if they hurt their lower back in a squat or in a deadlift? Like what are you prescribing?
So if, for example, we'll use that bulging disc situation, which occurs when there's excessive load, and then it just, forces the spine into a little bit of flexion, or too much flexion, and then you get that disc popping, posteriorly or backwards.
Yeah. So spinal flexion, for most people, just in case they don't really understand what that is, that's just rounding of the lower back, right? Just
Correct.
So we're on the same page. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
continue.
absolutely. Yeah. So rounding of the lower back, and then, the disc will go backwards. And so, simple logic will tell us that we have to do the opposite to try and push it back into to position. So there's a physio, actually New Zealand based, called Mackenzie, and he did a lot of research on the disc mechanics and all that. And he recommends actually getting into an extension position and sustaining it. So, for example, your story of doing it in a squat, say if that was a bulging disc situation, I would try and get you to lie on your tummy and prop yourself up, almost like in so you're lying on your belly and you're propped up on your elbows, and you're only extending your upper back, and just see if you can hold that for a couple of minutes or so. And when that becomes, if that's tolerable, I'll get them to do sort of, I guess, half push-ups where they're lying face down and just arching that, back up, almost like a cat stretch, and doing that 10 times. And that's just, the mechanics of that is it's pushing that disc back forwards. And then for gym, rehab exercise, gym exercises, you'll want to just change it up so that they don't get into too much loaded flexion. So if their goals are still to, like you said, develop their legs, I will probably say, okay, well, let's just not squat for X amount of time, and instead, for your quads, let's do some knee extension. For hammies, we'll do, your prone hamstring curls, maybe more machine based. I'll recommend that. Obviously if they're seeing a personal trainer, I'll be like, to speak to your PT about, altering, your programs, and you don't do too much loaded flexion, and just stick with, maybe machine based. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
no, it does. But I think also, and this is to kind of jump kind of thought patterns now, sometimes the personal trainer could be the problem. And I can only say this from experience as a personal trainer, that there's many personal trainers that aren't getting their clients to follow a program or check in with them frequently. Like myself and a few other personal trainers, like we were the anomaly in our gym because we had programs. We were walking around with an iPad saying, how'd you go? How'd you go? How'd you go? But I'd see some of the other trainers' clients get to the gym without the client, wondering what to do. And I think this is so wrong ultimately, because I think it's our duty as personal trainers to look after the client, because if they're not following a program that's structured, then things that you were talking about before, like overuse injuries, could potentially occur, because people, when they get into the gym, ultimately just do what they want to do. So say if I'm a dude and I'm into the gym and I see my trainer, we have a good workout, smashes me, whatever. But then when I go in, all I'm doing is chest, all I'm doing is shoulders, all I'm doing is the beach muscles that I want to get developed. Then when I come back to the trainer and just do my random workout again, like I'm not really making any progress. And potentially the personal trainer, without knowing, just because he or she is not providing a program or, making sure their form's awesome, checking up on them frequently. And they're potentially just getting these overuse injuries. And I know a common one, especially for men, because we love to train chest and shoulders and triceps and biceps, we get a lot of overuse in elbows, but also in shoulders.
Correct.
What have you seen? Is that correct? Are you seeing similar things?
Yeah. Took the words out of my mouth, man. But definitely elbows. And essentially because everything we do, even not everything, but most things we do in the gym, hey, we grip a lot, don't we? So we're going to get a lot of overuse injuries relating to just the gripping, and the biggest thing for that is tendon problems, tendonitis or tendinopathies, which I reckon, the most common one is your tennis elbow or lateral epicondylalgia, or epicondylitis, and that's where all your wrist sort of extensors converge on a tendon on your outer part of your elbow called the common extensor tendon, and that's when you following the theory of overuse injuries, it's just micro strain over time. They don't have enough ability, they don't get given the time to heal before it's again another overload, and then all of a sudden we get these the strain gets a little too much now, and then the pain generates. So yeah, tennis elbows are a big one. Analogous to that, you've got your rotator cuff tendonitis and tendinopathies too. The rotator cuff obviously being the deepest layer of shoulder musculature from our shoulder blade to arm bone or humerus. And the top one, sort of around this area here, is your supraspinatus, which is involved in everything we do, basically overhead, and even a little bit of forward pressing, but certainly overhead pressing. That has to be, in full action, so we can get overuse injuries relating to that too.
So how can people not get these overuse injuries? And obviously you can say, well, just don't use it as much, but what's a way that we can do that in a structured way?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think it's in the program. It's in how you appropriately load the tendon, and you give it the time that it needs to rest and recover as well. And so it really comes to how you load it and how you increase that load over a period of time. And sometimes, you won't know that you've overloaded it. You could have every, right intention of doing it. And then, you start to feel a little bit niggly afterwards. Then, you'll give that the time, it needs to settle down, and you'll know for next time, okay, instead of building it up by 5%, I might just drop it even lower, depending on what your body can handle. But it is in how you load the tendon. That's where we prevent the injuries.
Yeah, I think that's what I was touching on as well. Such a responsibility that we have as personal trainers, because you like, let's put the people that go to the gym on their own aside. Like, obviously, they're going to have to figure out trial and error or follow programs or just kind of do whatever they want. But that kind of puts them in that position. But with personal training, it's so important that you have a balanced program. And I wanted to ask you to see what your opinion was, and you answered it greatly. But I also wanted to touch on the importance of having a balanced program. And I've done your program, when we previously worked together. So you're probably analyzing it going, oh, I don't know about this, or, there's too much push, and there's not enough pull and all this kind of stuff. But I think the biggest problem is actually for men, just to kind of dive into that, is doing too many push exercises and not enough pull. And that doesn't allow us to recover enough. So like you're saying, we get these micro tears when we're training, and our muscles are micro tearing, and then they repair, and then that's essentially how they come bigger and stronger, to put muscle building really simply. But if we're doing chest on Monday, chest on Wednesday, chest on Thursday, chest on Friday, then there's these tears, potentially, with like in our elbows, because they're continually getting used with a chest press, with a tricep dip, with a dumbbell tricep extension, all this kind of overuse. It's so important that you have that balanced program of having a push day or chest, shoulders, triceps, and then having a pull day, biceps, rows, and actually allowing your body to develop strength in both movement patterns, pushes and pulls. And then also with arms, not just training all biceps, because that is a lot of grip, and training triceps as well. It's super important. And, I guess the same could be said for the legs. A lot of dudes will just train quads because that's what you see in the mirror. You pull your shorts up and you see this, the quad tear,
Mm.
sorry, the teardrop, and you're like, oh yeah, that looks sick. I'm just going to sit on the leg extension and do 10
Yeah,
sets, you know.
that's
but
it. Yeah,
but
that's
it's
it.
so important to train these opposing muscle groups. Is that something that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
encourage your clients to do?
100%, and you only have to look at the stats, man, for how common injuries occur, especially tendonitis or tendinopathies. Man, you have way more the prevalence, I guess, of tennis elbow, which would be used more in your push, programs or situations. The prevalence is higher than developing golfer's elbow, which is the opposite. Your golfer's elbow is more a tendonitis related to flexion type of movements, which is typically used more in your pull days. So yeah, having that balance, it just avoids that from developing. 100%, man. Yeah.
Also, before we kind of wrap this up, I've got a couple questions left for you. I did
Yeah.
a Q&A, and one thing that I really wanted to dive into, someone asked some tips as you get older. Now, I know that
Mm-hmm.
that's super broad, and you can't just say, oh, as you get older, this is what you have to do as a
Mm-hmm.
physiotherapist. But as people age in the gym, and not necessarily, they're heading into their 90s, but just people, maybe reaching their peak and then kind of acknowledging, oh, I'm not recovering as well. My body's kind of not feeling the same. I feel a bit more beat up. Um, like, what do you see happen in older populations, and what do you often recommend them to do?
Yeah. Look. Biggest recommendation, I said, when you do like a major acute episode of an injury, just get moving again. And that's the biggest thing. I really don't care what it is. Whether it's just going for a walk or going swimming, or if they want to go to the gym, I'll obviously push for that because I love the gym. But I just think they just need to keep maintaining movement, and it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. If you don't use it, you lose it,
I
which
love
is
that
actually
saying.
true. Yeah, it actually is true, because you will, you got, as we get older, unfortunately, things do happen, like muscle wasting, atrophy, and that kind of stuff. The bone density does decrease.
Mm.
And how do we combat that? Movement. It's exactly what we got to do. And so, yeah, I'll just usually give that advice. And if they've never exercised in their life and they're trying to get into it again, then I'll just give them, very like a generic sort of like, okay, well, how about aim for 3 times a week? What do you like to do? Oh, I can handle a bit of walking. Okay, let's go for a 30-minute walk 3 times a week, and then just build it up from there. But yeah, just promoting that movement, Brock. I think that's the key thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as we get older as well, I think it's important to know that actually maintaining muscle mass doesn't take as much effort as it does to build muscle mass.
Mm,
So when we
mm,
build
mm.
muscle mass and we get more advanced, like as a beginner, it's relatively easy because our body's not used to much stimulus. But as we
Yeah.
go from intermediate to advanced, and we train and we train and we train, muscle building is like so hard. Like I can tell you personally, after 14 years of training, I'm like fighting for half a pound of muscle anyway,
Mm,
and
mm,
I'm
mm.
and I'm trying to increase my weights by 1.25 kg anyway. Like that's like, as you become more advanced, it's just harder and harder and harder. And
Yeah.
but if I wanted to maintain my muscle mass, I could probably get away with training 2 or 3 times per week just to
Right.
maintain it. And I think that's so important to know as you get older. You don't have to
Yeah.
train like Arnold Schwarzenegger did to become Mr. Olympia.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
literally just
Yeah.
need to take your muscles through a range of motion, getting slightly close to failure, hitting kind of
Mm,
every
mm,
movement pattern, do a push, do a
mm.
pull, horizontal push, vertical
Yeah.
pull,
Yeah. Yeah.
vertical push, horizontal pull,
Yes.
arms, some accessory work, hip dominant
Yeah.
movement, knee dominant
Yeah.
movement, and then you're winning. Like it's not actually impossible, but this will do tons for the elderly population. Like, as you were saying, we do get
Mm.
muscle degradation, which is,
Yeah.
can be called sarcopenia or, atrophy, whatever it is. But that,
Mm.
that kind of fragility would also rob them of confidence, because I've seen that too with with my grandma, with my nana, she
Mm, mm.
she was always out in the garden. She was chopping wood, and we were like, Nana, you can't do that, man. Like, you can't be chopping wood. You can't be throwing around that axe,
Yeah,
as you're approaching your 90s. But
yeah.
she, like, she's super stubborn, old school style. She'll be out in the garden still doing it.
Definitely.
But yeah, that's super important to just acknowledge that you don't have to be sweating and doing heavy barbell back squats,
Mm,
because that kind of scares the older
mm.
population. But you do want them to be confident so that they can
Yeah.
meet up with their friends,
Mm,
get
mm.
coffee and all that, and just feel like, okay, my knee's not going to give way while I'm walking, like you said, or my
Correct.
lower
Yeah.
back's not going to give up. Because as you get older, you need to see friends, and there's other aspects of life, but just having that
Yes.
foundation of fitness can really help them.
Yeah. And actually, that's definitely uh, learning that for me just then, man. Like, I think I'll start using that in the clinic, just saying that, you know what, you it doesn't take much to maintain. I think if I say that, that's more going to be uplifting and build confidence.
Yeah.
And if I may as well, bro, I want to like share a personal story. And she's going to kill me for saying this, but I love my mom, and she's had a love-hate relationship with exercise, and I'm always up her back about exercising. And she's finally, this year joined the gym and
Awesome.
did a lot of walking. And prior to that, man, she was complaining of everything like hip pain, and there's a common thing that happens, unfortunately, more in ladies, called plantar fasciitis, which is a tendon problem in the foot. And she was hard out complaining of that. And then, she started exercising more this year and walking. And then all of a sudden that's gone. And she's a lot stronger with her grandkids and things like that. And it's great. Like I can finally see, all the nagging that I've been doing, coming to fruition. So, but yeah, no, I'm going to definitely start using that line, just, it doesn't take much to maintain, just get it, yeah, and you don't have to sweat, and carry a massive, weight to achieve a better, I would say better body, but just better usage of our body, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and also a higher
Mm,
quality of life, which seems
correct.
to, I guess, what's the word? Potentially decrease over time because your body's not doing what you want, and maybe you're unable to have
Mm,
as much freedom as you wanted to when you were younger. But just
mm,
kind of empowering them to have that enjoyment in life, and and making sure that their body is actually helping them along with life, as opposed to being
definitely.
such an obstacle, which is very common, as you get older.
Yep.
And one thing we saw, my fiance and I, when we moved over, so we recently moved house this year, but in Mossman over here, there's tons of people that have just retired, and they're in their budgie smugglers and they're swimming like every morning. And I'm like,
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
so good. They got their pink
yeah,
swimmers on and they got their pink caps on. Like, they have this kind of crew. But
yeah.
swimming is so good, man.
Mm,
Swimming is so good because there's no impact. Like, like,
100%.
like with running,
Mm,
maybe that repetitive impact while they're running wouldn't be the best thing for them. But swimming
mm,
is awesome, and it's like easy on the joints. You can still get an awesome workout. It's good for their heart. They're burning a ton
definitely.
of calories, and they're being social as well while they're out there. And
Yep.
I want to touch on as well. You love running, like you're
Mm,
as we were going through your transformation, which if you guys didn't see my Instagram post, Butch dropped 12 kg and like got stronger, dropped dropped a ton of fat, built some awesome muscle, got stronger, made some awesome progress. But what he was doing also was running half marathons, and was there full marathons in there as well?
no, no, just half, and one 25K, which is 4Ks over the half. Half is 21.
Yeah,
So
it's
that,
long
yeah,
enough.
long, yeah.
It's long enough. But yeah, you were really pushing that, which was awesome to see. Because
Mm,
especially with a lot of people, when they lift weights, they kind of join this anti-cardio team. So it was cool to see that you were pursuing both, because it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both.
mm,
You just have to kind of manage recovery and stuff. But with
definitely.
running as well, a lot of people in lockdown turned into runners because that was all that they had. Gyms were closed. Maybe they didn't have dumbbells, or they had kids at home and
Yeah.
there just wasn't, enough space or whatever. Um,
Mm,
but with running does come the impact of the knees
mm,
quite
mm.
quite a lot. What do you see and what do you kind of recommend for that? I know this can be quite broad, but I know that with
Mm-hmm.
running, especially me coaching a lot of clients, people are like, oh, I'm doing a lot of running, but my knees are a bit sore. What should I do? And I kind of usually recommend them to pull back to walking or even get
Mm-hmm.
into something like swimming, or maybe using the elliptical where there's less pressure on their knees or less repetition.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you see and what do you usually recommend people to do? I'm curious.
And with running, obviously, I'm going to talk more from a endurance running perspective. Being that it is the overuse injuries again coming into effect. So your tendinitis and tendinopathies and another major one in knees. So common ones I see a lot of are patella tendinitises, which if just for those out there, it's the tendon on the lower part of your kneecap going to the top part of your shin bone. Another common one is the ITB, the iliotibial band, which is still a tendon problem as well, and that can present as pain on the outer part of your knee. So those are the two big ones that we see. And again, like any overuse injuries, Brock, it's a training, man. It's how they've loaded themselves, and something along the lines. Just more often than not, their training volume just rapidly increased without them, sometimes without them even realizing. But volume can also it's not just your distance. It's also your frequency. Like I have people coming in here and going, oh, I've just been running 5K. And then halfway through a session, they'll tell me, oh, but you know what, I did it, 4 times this week rather than 2. And I'm going, well, that's exactly why then, let's maybe try 3, and stick with that for a month before going to 4 times a week. And then also, training terrain, if you've always run on concrete and then you decide, okay, I'm just going to do a beach run, that's a bit of a recipe for disaster too. So you'll have to sort of, make them do maybe like, a bit of running on grass first before, or softer terrain before trying to, get into the beach running sort of thing. And hills too, man, like inclines and declines, if all they've ever done, and that's why I really get into how they're actually training and, the kind of terrain, that they're training on. Are they running on flat ground versus inclines? Because you'll be able to pick where it's sort of gone, a little bit wrong, and then that's what's led to the injury. And it can also be like the footwear too, if they've got new shoes and then they took them for a spin and did 10K, straight off the bat, that can be also, something that would lead to an overuse injury as well. But when you are dealing with it, say it's really angry, you've got a really angry patellar tendinitis, like what you've just said, definitely, do an alternative, because you can still use, really work your heart and lungs and all that by getting on an elliptical or a cross trainer or a rowing machine or whatever, swimming, just so you get the cardiovascular component going. And until we drop that level of pain down, which occurs when, natural healing has happened, then we can start to load it up through running again. But pushing for that alternative for cardio, and then as we recover, build up on that.
So how did you manage your running? Because I'm not too sure if you were massively into running when we first started, but then pretty soon you were running half marathons. Like, how did you progress it? Because it's so tempting just to go out there and go, okay, I'm training for a half marathon. I'm going to just run one, or I'm going to do 10K. And then a couple of days later, I'll do 20, and then I'll just do 20, every single day. Because especially like running attracts certain personalities, and they're very competitive. They want to beat times. And I'm sure your brain ticks like that. So how do you manage that competitive nature so you have adequate recovery and long-term it's beneficial for you and not detrimental?
Correct. I just want to start by saying, I was always into running before I started training with you. So that was always, and I would go for like, my baseline is always twice a week. I'll do like a middle, usually Wednesday, sort of light-ish run, I guess, which is anywhere between, 5 to 8K. And then I'll go and do a Sunday run, which is a little bit longer. And that can be anywhere between, 15 and above sort of thing.
Wow.
But yeah, I don't know. I just sort of, in a way, I'm lucky because I sort of just followed that with my own sort of physio knowledge. I started running in 2017, and I just never really got, injured. But mind you, my running is, I just keep it basically flat. I don't do too much inclines. But yeah, so what was your question? How do I manage?
Yeah, like how did you manage not to get injured and kind of,
Mm,
work your way up to doing these half marathons? Because you were still,
mm,
now that we know, still running, but
mm,
I'm
mm,
sure you would have had a game plan like going into it. So I think if there's any runners listening, it would help for them, if they want to
mm,
do a half marathon or even build up to this full marathon,
mm, mm.
how could they like increase from where they are to get, like, is there any kind of um what's the word, like checkpoints that they could do to get there?
Mm. I think if you're trying to say train for a half marathon, it's laying out the length of time you want to build up for it. So say, for example, if I committed to a half marathon today, and at this point in time, I've only been doing 5Ks. I would say maybe like do it middle of next year, as a goal,
Yeah.
and then program that, through that 6 months of how you're going to gradually increase your mileage.
Mm.
And knowing it pays to know the event you want to do as well, or, your overall goal, because if it's just going to be road running, there's no need to, be running, off-road and doing trail running, that kind of stuff. So
Beach
just
runs.
knowing, that's right, knowing what you want to do, and then just gradually building it up. And I think for me, what worked was building, I think it was like 2K every 2 weeks or something like that. So a kilometer basically a week of building it up,
Mm.
and never getting to, I actually heard this from a running coach, but you never train to the distance you're going to compete in, or your maximum distance as part of your training. You sort of go to like 20, half a marathon is 21. So I only ever, would run, if I'm training for one, up to 18K. Yeah. So before we met each other, I was already doing that anyway, like, doing the running. So
Mm.
I just set a personal goal this year to try and do 5 half marathons and one that was a little extra, to see if I can have the mentality to then train for a full. So my most recent one, I did a Gold Coast run, and it was 25Ks. And yeah, it was pretty rough. And I know that I have to, again, really lay out the plan of how I'm going to tackle that goal to achieve a full. Because I just, I was getting close. I could feel I was getting close to that kind of like overuse, situation at the end there, man. So
Yeah.
it's all in the planning, bro. Yeah.
Yeah. I had well, not a similar experience because I completely stuffed it up, but when was this? It was maybe 3 years ago. I did
Mm.
a Black Boss half marathon,
Yeah.
and I had no idea. Like, I'm not a runner, as you know. I'm not the
Yeah.
build for a runner. Actually, when I was younger, I was like a cross country runner, but this was younger,
Yeah. Yeah.
like maybe 10 years old, because I was like a real light kind of skinny guy. But then when you get into gym, it kind of, the muscle kind of starts holding
Yeah.
you back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was doing a half marathon, but I was like, man, I can't really be bothered training for it. So
Mm.
a couple of weeks
Mm.
before it, I was like, I'll go for a 10K and then I'll just double it later, and this is probably what a few people do.
Yeah. If
So
you
I,
came into the clinic, bro.
yeah. Or I wish I had this podcast beforehand. So I did I think it was a 10K run, or maybe even 12, from Bondi. I did the Bondi to Coogee and all the way back.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I did it. I didn't have running shoes either. And I just put on some shoes that I thought would be the best, and they weren't. I ran there and I came back, and I stopped. The next day I was absolutely shattered. But one thing that
Yeah.
I'd never experienced is plantar fasciitis. So underneath the bottom of
Yeah.
my feet was absolutely hammered. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so I was like, oh, I'll do that 10 and then I'll keep building up until, but I actually couldn't run for the entire 2 weeks up until, because they were sore. Like the bottoms of my feet were so sore. They're like tore. So I
Yeah.
couldn't even do split squats, because just
Yeah.
having my foot up like that
was putting a lot of
was causing a ton of pain. So my training
yeah.
with legs went down, my running went back
Mm.
to zero.
Mm, mm.
So then when I did the 21 or the half marathon, I was just like they were still sore, and I was trying to like roll it with a golf ball and do all this kind of
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
on the bottom of my feet, but it wasn't working.
Mm.
And I absolutely I wasn't trying to break any records, but I didn't do very well with my run,
Mm.
like, because
Mm,
I was
mm.
just I was just so sore. I didn't recover. I just did like the whole shotgun approach, which most people probably do. Like, oh, I'm just going to
Yeah,
do one run beforehand and then I'll be all good. But
yeah,
then
yeah.
after that half marathon, it was the same thing for a couple of
Mm,
weeks.
mm.
I couldn't
Mm,
train
mm.
legs, or like it really screws you up. Like if you don't
Yeah,
prepare.
yeah. Exactly. And a lot of and you know, I did do a lot of my half marathons, admittedly in succession. I think 3 of them were like 2 weeks apart. And
Wow.
when I tell patients that, they just tell me, you know, you're crazy, first of all. And secondly, they go, how are you not injured? But what they don't know is I have been running, you know, I
Yeah.
always run. Like it's a weekly thing for me. It's not like it's an overload. I've never run past 21 Ks.
Mm.
So I just know that I can, you know, like achieve it because I have planned for it. So I think it just comes down to planning, man. And like you said, you know, for your one, you know, it was a shotgun approach. And look, you know, that happens anywhere. You know, we do it in the gym too, and then we come away with, you know, with an injury. So it's just, you know, how we load, bro, like how we increase it over that time. That's going to lead to, you know, to success rather than, you know, developing injuries and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
Mate, thank you so much for your time. I don't want to hold you any longer.
All
Um,
good.
where can people find you, man? Like I love your approach. I'm sure a lot of people love your approach to you know, to physio and being hands-on. And actually, to be honest, I've had a lot of potentially negative, probably negative
Mm.
experience with physio, and that's not to do with anything of your industry. You know, maybe you know, as I've kind of, you know, been dealt with as a client, maybe I haven't necessarily agreed or just
Mm.
understood the approach that we're taking. I think that's a big one.
Mm.
And I love how you touch on things and actually explaining to the client, look, you know, like use it or lose it, or, you know, we're going
Mm.
to have a little bit of pain. These things I was never told when I was injured, especially when I did my
Mm.
lower back. It was just like, oh yeah,
Mm.
do these stretches, do these exercises and go. And I was like, well, like, when am I going to be better? Or like, why am I doing this? Or
Mm.
like I had
Mm.
no idea what I'm doing. So I love your, you know, explaining the science behind it and, you know, really getting close to the patient. How can people find you
Mm.
and kind of, you
Yeah,
know, work with you if they can?
yeah. So I'm called the Lakes Physio. If you jump on Insta and just put that on your search bar, no spaces or or underscores or anything. The Lakes Physio. It's a blue Running Man logo, and it's for those that reside in Brisbane. It's in Springfield Lakes, in the western suburbs. And yeah, feel free to just shoot me a message about anything, and I'll see if I can help within obviously my capacity. You know, I do want to, you know, see people in the clinic first and do an assessment before giving out sort of, you know,
Mm.
specific advice, I guess, and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And what's next for you, man? Like, is there anything you're working on? Do you want to expand the practice, or, you know, do you want to learn more things? Like, what's coming up for you?
Yeah. I am in the process at the moment of expanding. I've got a remedial massage therapist starting up very soon, and then I'm in the hunt for another physio because I'll be working out of this medical center and a big gym being built actually just not far from where I'm currently at. So I'll have the two areas going, and it's the first big bit of growth for the Lakes Physio. So pretty exciting times ahead.
Awesome, man. That's great. Well, appreciate your time, man. And everyone, if you're listening, if you want to work with him, at the Lakes Physio, no spaces
Correct.
is where you
No
find him.
spaces. Yep.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on, brother.
Thank you, bro. Appreciate it, man. And thank you for all your help with my own transformation too, bro. Really appreciate it.
Awesome, man. It's great.